At lunch, I saw my mother-in-law spike my drink, so I quietly switched it with her husband's. What happened next stunned everyone. And exposed something no one was ready for. It was supposed to be just another Sunday lunch. You know, the kind roast chicken, awkward small talk, the sound of silverware clinking against plates, and my mother-in-law's fake laugh echoing across the table. I had long learned to navigate those meals with a kind of quiet endurance, biting my tongue and smiling through the tension. But that day broke the mold. I saw it happen out of the corner of my eye. She leaned over the counter with a sly glance, poured something from a tiny bottle into my iced tea, and stirred it with the straw like nothing happened. My blood turned cold. I didn't move right away. I just stared at her, heart pounding, wondering if I had seen what I thought I saw. She turned around and handed me the glass with that practiced smile of hers, the one that never quite reached. Her eyes, I didn't confront her. Not then. Not with my husband and the rest of the family chatting away just a few feet away. Instead, I did something I can't believe I even had the nerve to do. While she was turned, I swapped my glass with her husband's, just like that, quiet, quick, and maybe a little bit reckless. When he took a sip, everything changed. And what followed? Well, that lunch tore the lid off a truth no one in our family was prepared for. A routine gathering already simmering with tension. I'd always hated those lunches. Not because of the food, though my mother-in-law had a knack for overcooking chicken and under-seasoning everything else, but because of the atmosphere. There was something performative about the way everyone sat around that glossy dining table, pretending we were one big happy family. My husband, Mark, always tried to smooth things over with his awkward jokes. His younger sister, Dana, would sip wine and scroll her phone, clearly bored. And then there was Lorraine, the queen of the house, sitting at the head of the table like she was presiding over a royal court. Lorraine never liked me. Not from the start. She smiled through her teeth and called me sweetheart, a voice that made my skin crawl. The first time I met her, she asked if I was planning to keep my job after the wedding, as if working was a temporary hobby. Over the years, her disapproval settled into a quiet hostility, the kind that never screamed but always lingered, like the smell of something burnt. That Sunday started like all the others. We brought a bottle of wine. I helped set the table, and Lorraine made her usual snide remarks about how today's women don't really cook anymore. Her husband, George, sat in his usual spot near the window, cheerful as ever, totally unaware of the barbed glances flying across the table. But something felt off. Lorraine was jittery, more clipped than usual, her eyes darting around like she was keeping a secret. When she offered to pour the drinks, I instinctively followed her into the kitchen. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the years of subtle digs and fake smiles had finally worn me thin. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew she was capable of more than just words. That's when I saw it. A small bottle, almost clear, slipping from her purse and into her palm. She glanced over her shoulder, didn't see me, and tipped the contents into my glass of iced tea. My breath caught. She stirred it, smiling to herself like she'd just added lemon. Then she turned, as calm as ever, and handed it to me. That glass felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hand. Every instinct screamed at me to speak up, to shout across the house, to demand an explanation. But instead, I placed it gently on the counter, waited until she looked away, and then, as casually as I could, switched it with the untouched glass she had poured for George. No one saw me do it. Not Mark, not Dana, not even Lorraine. But when George took a sip, everything slowed down. He coughed once, then twice. And then he leaned back in his chair, clutching his stomach, while Lorraine's face drained of color. I had no idea what I'd just set into motion. The moment I saw her hand shift, I knew I could never trust her again. George was still coughing when I caught Lorraine's eyes across the table. Her expression was unreadable for a second, like her brain was buffering. Then it snapped into something terrifying, panic masked by politeness. She reached over with a paper napkin, fussing over George like nothing was wrong. "Must have gone down the wrong pipe," she said too quickly. But I saw it, that flicker of fear. She wasn't worried about him. She was worried about what he'd just swallowed. I stayed quiet. Part of me was frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The other part, watching her like a hawk. Lorraine prided herself on control of the room, of conversations, of her image. She'd never let a crack show if she could help it. But now her hands were trembling as she poured more water into George's glass. Her fingers fumbled the pitcher. Across the table, Mark asked if his dad was okay, but Lorraine cut him off before he could finish. "He's fine. He always reacts like this when he eats too fast." It was a lie, a terrible one. George hadn't even touched his plate yet. That's when I realized she hadn't meant to hurt George. The drink was for me. That lie wasn't just about covering up what had happened. It was an instinct, a reflex. She wasn't thinking about her husband. She was scrambling to regain control of a situation that had just spun out of her hands, and I was the only one who knew. We went through the motions of the meal after that, but nothing tasted right. I barely touched my food. Lorraine avoided looking at me altogether. George, to his credit, recovered quickly, though he kept rubbing his temples and saying he felt off. I offered to take him to urgent care, but Lorraine cut me off again. "He's fine. He doesn't need a doctor for a little indigestion." A lie again, too fast. Too forceful. I wanted to scream. Not because I was scared, though. Yes, a piece of me was, but because I realized how easily she could have gotten away with it. If I hadn't seen her, if I'd just taken the drink like she expected, I might be the one rubbing my head. Or worse, thought the rest of the afternoon was a blur. Mark chatted with his sister about vacation plans. George went to lie down. And Lorraine, she washed the dishes like nothing had happened, humming to herself with her back turned to me. But something had happened. Something big. And I wasn't about to let it slide. I just didn't know, not yet, that the poison wasn't even the worst part of what she was hiding. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply did what needed to be done. You'd think a moment like that, realizing someone was trying to drug you, would send you into a full panic. But that wasn't what happened. When I saw her pour that liquid into my drink, something inside me just ... clicked. Not fear. Not even anger, just this cold, focused clarity. Like everything I'd ever suspected about Lorraine finally lined up, and I had one brief chance to prove it. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I'd drink it, maybe get dizzy, feel embarrassed. Or worse, and then she'd get to play the concerned matriarch. I could see it already. Her holding my hand, telling Mark I was probably just stressed, maybe a little unwell. She'd love that. A weakened version of me. An excuse to slide in, offer help, and chip away at whatever place I held in her son's life. But I saw her, and instead of reacting, I watched her hand that glass to me like it was a peace offering. I took it. I smiled. I even thanked her. And then I waited she turned her back for maybe 3 seconds. Just enough. George's glass sat near the sink, untouched. I moved fast. My hands didn't shake. I just reached out, swapped the glasses, and stepped back into place like nothing had happened. It felt theatrical almost. Like I was part of some high-stakes scene in a movie, but it wasn't pretend. This was real. Lorraine had done something calculated. And now her plan had changed course, whether she knew it yet or not. When we all sat down, my stomach churned with more than nerves. I kept glancing toward George, half hoping the liquid had been harmless, maybe a laxative or some herbal sleep drop Lorraine believed would make me less tense. But when he started coughing, when his face flushed a strange pink, when he blinked like the room was spinning, I knew it wasn't innocent. Lorraine didn't touch her own drink. That told me everything, and still I said nothing. What could I have said? Hey, everyone, Lorraine tried to drug me, so I let her own husband drink it instead. I wasn't even sure what she had put in the glass. All I knew was that George didn't look right. and she looked like she was about to implode. Later, as George rested upstairs and the lunch wound down into awkward silences, I sat on the edge of my seat, waiting for Lorraine to confront me. But she didn't. Not yet. Maybe she thought I hadn't noticed. Maybe she thought George just had a sensitive stomach. Or maybe, and this chilled me more than anything, she didn't care if it had gone wrong. Maybe she just wanted someone to hurt. What I didn't expect was that this silent act of defiance, this one glass swapping move, would unlock secrets far darker than I ever imagined. He slumped in his chair, and the look on her face said more than words ever could. We were halfway through the meal when George's hands started to tremble. At first, it was subtle, the kind of shake you might mistake for nerves or age. He held. His fork paused mid-bite and stared at the mashed potatoes like he'd forgotten what they were. Then he blinked a few times, squinted at the plate, and slowly set his fork down. I feel strange, he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Lorraine stiffened immediately. Her eyes darted to him, then flicked to me, then back to her husband. That mask she wore so well, calm, charming, composed, it cracked just a little. Her smile faltered. Her hands, neatly folded on the table just seconds before, curled into tight fists in her lap. George shifted in his seat again. He reached for his water glass and missed it, knocking it over instead. Ice cubes spilled across the tablecloth. Dana gasped. Mark jumped up to grab some paper towels. "Dad, are you okay?" Mark asked, crouching beside him. "I don't know," George replied. "It's like my head, it's fuzzy." Lorraine was on her feet then, moving too quickly for someone who was not concerned. She knelt beside George but didn't touch him. Her hands hovered, unsure. "Maybe your blood sugar is low," she said. "You skipped breakfast, didn't you?" But George shook his head slowly. "No, I ate. Eggs. Toast. Remember?" Her lips tightened. She couldn't hide it anymore, the fear. And it wasn't just concern for him. It was something else. Something more desperate. Dana offered to call an ambulance. Lorraine snapped. "He doesn't need an ambulance." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. The table went silent. George looked up at her then, and something passed between them. A flash of recognition? Accusation? Regret? I couldn't tell. But it was clear they shared something. Something unsaid. I stayed silent, watching it all unfold. My heart was thudding, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Lorraine still didn't know what I'd done. She thought I drunk the tea. That her plan, whatever it was, had gone exactly as intended. Except it hadn't. Mark helped George to the couch while Lorraine disappeared into the kitchen, muttering something about electrolytes. Dana trailed behind her, asking if she should call urgent care anyway. I remained seated, staring at the spilled water, feeling like I was watching a play unfold, except no one else knew they were acting. What disturbed me most wasn't just George's condition or Lorraine's panic. It was that brief flicker of emotion I caught in her eyes as she stared at him. Regret? No. Fear? Maybe guilt? Not a chance. It looked a lot like dread. Like she knew what came next and couldn't stop it. A trip to the hospital revealed far more than a health scare. By that evening, George still looked pale and shaky, and his speech was slurring just enough to make Mark worried. Lorraine insisted it was just dehydration, but after he nearly tripped getting up from the couch, Mark made the call. Within an hour, we were at St. Clair's EO. George stretched out on a hospital bed with N4 in his arm, the fluorescent lights washing out what little color remained in his face. Lorraine paced the hallway like a caged animal, arms crossed, eyes darting to every nurse who walked by. I stayed planted in the plastic chair outside the room, watching her. "You didn't have to call them," she muttered to Mark, who ignored her. "He collapsed, Mom." "I told you," he skipped breakfast. "It happens." Mark shot her a look that made me want to hug him. "You said he didn't skip breakfast." Lorraine froze. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned sharply and walked down the hall. I took that as my cue, while Mark talked to the nurse. I slipped into George's room. He was groggy but awake, blinking slowly at the ceiling like he was trying to remember something. "Hey," I said softly, approaching his bedside. His eyes flicked toward me. "Did Lorraine send you?" I smiled gently. "No, I just wanted to see how you're feeling." He didn't answer at first. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said something I didn't expect. This happened before I blinked. "What do you mean?" He closed his eyes. "A few years ago." Same feeling, dizziness, head fog. I thought it was vertigo, but it never really added up. "Did you go to a doctor?" She said it was stress, that I'd been working too hard. "She?" I asked, but I already knew. He nodded slowly. "Lorraine." I sat down beside him. My chest tightened. This wasn't some one-time impulse. Lorraine had done this before, maybe more than once. Before I could say anything else, a nurse came in with a clipboard and a guarded look. She asked to speak with me privately. Out in the hall, she glanced at her notes, then said, "We found traces of lorazepam in his system. Did he take any medication today?" I stared at her. "No, not unless someone gave it to him without his knowledge." Her brow furrowed. "That's a sedative. A strong one. It doesn't just show up by accident." I nodded slowly. "I know." She paused. "Should we contact the police?" I hesitated. This wasn't just about George anymore. This was about Lorraine and the quiet power she had always held in that family. And suddenly, I wasn't sure how far she'd gone to protect that power, or what she might do next. But I knew one thing. This went deeper than a spiked drink. Something ugly was buried in their past, and it was starting to surface. I heard a conversation I was never meant to hear, and it changed everything. Hospitals are strange places. Time slows down, everything smells like bleach, and secrets seem to rise up through the vents. I'd been sitting outside George's room for over an hour, fiddling with my phone, when I realized Lorraine hadn't come back from her mysterious walk. Mark had gone home to grab an overnight bag, and Dana was curled up asleep in a chair. Down the corridor, I stood up to stretch my legs, more out of anxiety than anything else. That's when I saw her, Lorraine, speaking to a man I didn't recognize near the end of the hallway. He was tall, sharply dressed, maybe early 60s, not a doctor. Not a family friend I'd ever seen. They didn't see me. I ducked behind a corner. Wall close enough to hear them, but far enough to stay out of view. "You said she wouldn't notice," the man whispered harshly. "She wasn't supposed to," Lorraine snapped. But she switched the glasses. I saw George drink it and I knew right away. My blood ran cold. "She's smarter than you." "Gave her credit for," he said, his voice laced with something dark, maybe frustration, maybe fear. "She's not the problem," Lorraine replied, lowering her voice. "It's what she'd find if she starts digging." There was a pause. "She already has, hasn't she?" he asked. "That's what this is really about." Lorraine didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, she said, "I can't let it resurface. Not after all these years. It would ruin everything." "Then fix it," he growled. "Before she talks to George." They started walking again, and I stepped back into the shadows, heart hammering in my chest. Fix what? What had they buried so deeply that even drugging me seemed like a better alternative to letting it come out? I returned to the waiting room with my head spinning. All I could think about was that conversation. Lorraine had confirmed what I already suspected. The spiked drink wasn't a one-off. It is a cover-up. A desperate act to prevent me from unearthing something far worse, and then it hit me. George's confused words in the hospital bed, his earlier episodes, Loren's cold manipulation. This wasn't just about control. It was about history. About secrets older than my marriage, older than our Sunday lunches. That man she spoke to, he wasn't random. He knew things. Things that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. I didn't have proof yet, but I had direction, and I knew exactly where I needed to look next. Buried under dust and linens, I found the first real piece of the truth. The next morning, while Lorraine was still at the hospital and Mark was busy on work calls, I made an excuse to visit his grandmother's old house, the one Lorraine had kept mostly untouched since she passed. It had always struck me as odd that no one was allowed in there, not even to pack things up properly. Lorraine insisted on preserving the space, like it was some shrine. But after what I overheard at the hospital, I had a feeling it was. More of a vault than a memorial. The key was still hidden under the chipped ceramic frog by the front porch, exactly where George once told me it had been since 1972. I stepped inside, greeted by the scent of old perfume and cedar wood. Everything was frozen in time. Crocheted throws on the couch, stacked magazines from a decade ago, photos of the family, including a much younger Lorraine with a rigid smile and an awkward stance beside a man I didn't recognize, went straight to the bedroom. The closet was packed with yellowing linens and unused pillows, but behind them, wedged beneath a stack of hat boxes, I found it, a worn leather box with tarnished brass corners. It looked like the kind of thing someone once cared about and then needed to forget. I sat on the floor, heart thudding, and opened it. Inside were old letters, brittle with age, dozens of them bound in a silk ribbon. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I scanned the first few. They weren't addressed to Lorraine. They were written by her to someone named Robert. The tone wasn't romantic. It was urgent, secretive, frantic. One line hit me like a slap. If George ever finds out what we did that summer, it's over. For all of us. Another letter, dated the following month, read, "He's been having spells again. Memory gaps. I think it's starting. Maybe it's already started." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a cover-up, one spanning years, maybe decades. Whatever they did that summer had triggered something in George. And Lorraine had been managing, hiding, possibly even manipulating that decline ever since. Digging deeper into the box, I found a faded photograph tucked behind a stack of folded recipes. It showed Lorraine, the same man from the hospital, and a much younger George, standing beside what looked like a summer cabin, all of them smiling. But the smiles were stiff, strained, forced. There was something in that image, in the way Lorraine's hand barely touched George's, that made my stomach knot. I didn't know the full story yet, that I had a piece of it, and I wasn't the only one, because behind me the floorboard creaked. Someone else had followed me in. She tried to twist the story, but the truth was already in the room with us. I spun around so fast, I nearly dropped the box. Lorraine stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom. Her expression caught somewhere between fury and panic. She didn't ask what I was doing. She didn't need to. Her eyes went straight to the leather box in my lap. Her voice, when it finally came, was tight and low. "You had no right." I stood, clutching the box. "You tried to drug me." She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. George is in a hospital bed right now because you slipped something into his drink, something meant for me." She crossed her arms. I did what I had to do. That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Mark showed up not long after, summoned by a vague, frantic message from Lorraine. She had no idea I'd already filled him in. No idea he'd seen George's test results. No idea he'd stood outside the hospital room and heard his father say, "She's done this before." We sat around the same dining table where it all began. Lorraine, Mark, Dana, and me, the leather box now open between us like evidence at a trial. "This is insane," Lorraine said, flipping through the letters like they meant nothing. "These are old, irrelevant." "They mention memory loss," I said. "They mention covering something up. Something that happened the summer George started forgetting things." Mark's face was pale. "Mom, what did you do?" Lorraine's jaw tightened. She looked at her children as if she couldn't believe they were even questioning her. "You wouldn't understand. I did what was necessary to protect this family." "By drugging Dad?" Dana asked, voice rising. Lorraine snapped. He was going to remember. He started asking questions again. If he found out what we did, if he told anyone. She stopped herself too late. The room went still. What you did? Mark said, voice trembling. She looked at him then, not like a mother looks at her son, but like someone trying to keep hold of a lie unraveling too fast. There was an accident, she said quietly, a long time ago. At the cabin, Robert, the man from those letters, and we thought George would ruin everything. He was going to tell. Tell what? I asked Dot. She didn't answer. Just stared at the table. Dot. I pushed the photo across to her. You've been sedating him for years. To keep him from remembering. But now he's remembering anyway, isn't he? Her hands trembled as she picked up the photo. For a moment, she looked old. Not polished or controlling. Just tired. Like someone who'd been running from something for too long. I never meant for it to get this far, she said softly, but it already had, and the worst part? We still didn't know what George had tried to tell, or what Lorraine was so desperate to erase. What she gave me wasn't just a drug. It was a thread that unraveled everything. The next day, I returned to the hospital with the photograph, and the letters tucked into a manila folder. George was sitting up, sipping apple juice with shaky hands, but his eyes were sharper than they'd been in days. Can I ask you something? I said, sliding into the chair beside him. He nodded. I placed the photo in his lap. Do you remember this place? He stared at it for a long moment. His fingers trembled as he traced the cabin in the background, then moved to Lorraine's face. That summer, he murmured. I knew something happened. I waited. She and Robert, they were always whispering, always sending me out for errands. One night I came back early, heard them talking about the fire, about making it look like an accident. He looked at me now, eyes wide with something between fear and clarity. There was a boy, a neighbor's kid. He went missing that summer. They said he ran away, but I remember. His voice trailed off. You remember what? I pressed gently. I saw Lorraine crying. Not like when someone's sad, like when someone's guilty. I asked what was wrong. She told me to forget. It said I was confused. And then, a few days later, I got sick, real sick. That was the first time. My heart dropped. The lorazepam. The memory loss. It all started then. Lorraine hadn't just been covering for George's health. She'd been using it to erase him, piece by piece. Later that night, I called a friend who worked in law enforcement. Quietly, discreetly. I handed over the letters, the photograph, even the bottle of pills I'd retrieved from Lorraine's purse when she wasn't looking. It wasn't proof of a crime, not yet, but it was enough to start asking questions, and someone needed to ask them. When the detectives came to speak with George the next day, Lorraine didn't even flinch. She stood in the corner, arms folded. Cold and silent. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The story she kept buried for decades was finally cracking open. As for George, he never fully recovered his memory. But sometimes, when we talked, he'd mention things that hadn't come up in years. A boat, a matchbox, a scream in the woods. Little things. Pieces of a puzzle Lorraine had worked so hard to scatter. In the end, no formal charges were ever filed. Not yet. The boy's disappearance from that summer remained an open case, but now with new evidence, it was no longer forgotten. And Lorraine? She left town. Just packed up and vanished one day without a word. We haven't seen her since. I still sit at that table sometimes. The same one where she handed me that glass, the one I never drank from. The day everything changed, the day her poison finally did what it was meant to do. It revealed the truth. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?